stile di vita cambia.
Si comincia? Ciao, sono William. Questo blocco sarà in spagnolo. Se avete bisogno di traduzione.
And this session will be. What did she do? It will be in Spanish, but you can still get an English translation.
Come ho detto, mi chiamo sono William, nasci in Costa Rica e vivo negli Stati Uniti.
I was born in Costa Rica, but I live in the United States. We've got a PowerPoint here.
Usamos este momento para saludar a todas las personas que se encuentran en el Zoom.
I make the most of this moment to greet all those who are linked up on Zoom. Thank you for being with us. We know there's a difference in time between one place and another. And so I think it's a good challenge for us. The united world is a world also of differences. That maybe we think it's an obvious thing, it's part of our human nature. It's the desire to have a good life for our families, for our communities or nations. But it's not such an easy concept if we take into consideration the many factors and elements that define it. For example, it can be interpreted as a concept that's dangerous and it can deceive. It's important to grasp that our understanding of good living is conditioned by social, cultural, and historic factors. For example, what one nation or community can define as the basis for a good life for its citizens can be very different from what others define or consider necessary for a good life. The global differences between the resources available and accessible between North and South prove this. In this way, good living can become a bourgeois slogan to justify a style of life that's excessive or completely concentrated on individualistic desires.
Bajo esta mentalidad,
according to this mentality, economic and religious systems can become normalized as a constitutive part to justify social inequalities. So then good living becomes a mechanism to justify unequalness and prejudice. In other words, to withdraw from our responsibility. We need to be aware of how we define or use the expression good living. In the first place, the idea of a good life, a dignified and fulfilled life, is an intrinsic right of every person, independently of who they are, where they come from, whatever their nationality, sex, ethnic group, their level of education, their religion. Moreover, it's a responsibility of nations, individually and collectively, to create and ensure social conditions to enable people to obtain a good life. In this sense, there's a social contract which is intrinsic between nations, between their institutions and their members for a good living. And this brings us to the reality that good living is always collective, even if people experience it individually. Moreover, according to me, collectivity is the second central element of good living, not only because humanity is interconnected, but also because the human being, the I, exists in relationship with the plural, in communication with the other.
visión y nuestro pensar es centralizar el tú.
So my good living cannot use I as the only point of reference. On the contrary, the true revolution in our thought is to put you at the center, the other, the I, which is the other, and we should use the collective as the point of departure for good living. And this goes against popular thinking. But because my good living is linked to the good living of the other, we cannot be in peace with ourselves if the other is suffering or cannot develop themselves fully. The satisfaction of our needs can never become an ultimate goal of our life or of the parameters that define good living. This concept of communitarian life is found in all the world as part of human patrimony. In Mexico, the indigenous communities have the concept of in laquec, which can be translated as you are my other. Luis Valdez, a Latino playwright, writes, in laquec, you are the other me. If I hurt you, I'm hurting me. If I love you and I respect you, I love me and I respect myself. Our good living presupposes working so as to eliminate any ideology which creates hierarchies between human beings. For example, we cannot expect to be living well under a system that discriminates, belittles, or silences women, immigrants, indigenous communities, etc. And we cannot delegate or shirk our own responsibilities towards those who are the weakest, the underprivileged, those who are excluded, rejected, the invisible. Every human being has the right, just because they're human, to live well. And so we have to work so as to create and promote a system of production that isn't based on the extraction of natural resources or on the exploitation of people or the accumulation of riches or the building good knowledge of people. Our good living recognizes the value of the human being beyond the definitions of citizenship imposed by nationalistic projects. So good living isn't the privilege of a few citizens of a country that leaves out the immigrants. Our good living wants and works for the quality of life of those who are immigrants. At the same time, we have to work to promote and create socio-economic conditions in other nations so that people are not forced to leave their countries because there's no work or a lack of access to medical care or violence or religious discrimination. Both migrating and not being forced to migrate are human rights of every individual. Moreover, our living well is also a project which is epistemological and aesthetic because it rejects colonial centrism and recognizes the existence of a variety of systems of knowledge where the West is only one of many reference points that exist. Our good living that exists in the plurality of consciences. Good living looks for equality, but goes beyond this. In fact, our good living exists in diversity. During these days, it seems that the general opinion of people is the desire to go back to how the world was before COVID. The truth is that this isn't enough, because the world as it was before, the model we were using, wasn't working. We need a new proposal for good living. Our style of good living comes from our commitment to create and promote a culture of empathy and to dare to take care and to be concerned about other people. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, William, por esta introducción. Introduce justamente un poco
Many thanks, William, for your introduction,
este concepto del buen vivir, de todas las aristas que podemos
which leads us into the complexity of this concept. Now, we want to go a little bit more into depth into this complex perspective through the eyes of the indigenous peoples. Obviously, we can't take on talking about indigenous peoples, but we would like to ask someone who can convey genuine opinion of indigenous peoples. We can't hear about all types of indigenous people, but here we have someone who can help us. Her name is Elisa Sulca. She's from Tastil de Salta in the north of Argentina. She's also a professor and researcher at the National University of Salta. Are you there? Hello, yes. How are you all? Here it's morning now. We want to thank you very much for getting up so early on a Sunday morning and for sharing something with us. If you'd like to tell us something about yourself and also the city of Tastil. Yes, of course. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak in these conversations, which are so significant at a time of capitalism and individualism, which is not good for humanity. It's good to have these different voices. As was said, my name is Elisa. I'm doing teaching and research at the National University of Salta in the north of Argentina. I don't only work for the indigenous cause, but also at the level of university where I teach. I think that is really where I belong. The Tastil people have been seeking great independence, if I understood correctly, for the last 14 or 15 years. They wanted to affirm their identity, their existence. And generally speaking, in Argentina, the Organization for Indigenous Peoples works starting from access to land, because the resources of peoples have been taken away, so they have claimed them back again, and the state has recognized the rightfulness of this, and the state passed laws to preserve the ownership of the land by the indigenous peoples, and this is the main driving factor in these organizations. And this happens up and down the country. Every place is different. The identity of our indigenous peoples who recognize their own identity and therefore claim a recognized identity because they're in a state which enables also the mobility. There are good relationships amongst these peoples as well, these indigenous peoples, but the relationships and tensions that exist in the country, they don't have that much power. There are some closer with better relationships with the state who saw the capitalist, egocentric, powerful effects of the government. But these authentic claims that are made are not always considered necessary by the governing people. And so today's meeting, I would like to say that what we need isn't material goods, economic capital, but other aspects of life, the Earth's resources, not just to live for a level of life or standard of living, but there is a symbolic meaning of a real bond with the earth. So it was necessary to reorganize. There are 14 communities in the province of Salta itself, 15 self-recognized, as it were, self-identified peoples after the census of 2010, and are done by other people about indigenous peoples. And these sources of information have enabled us to count the indigenous peoples. We're just starting a more inclusive census now, and we will know better in the near future what the real situation is like, how many indigenous peoples there truly are in our immediate territory. Some of them are recognized, of course, by the state. Others affirm their own identity as such. Others have a legal recognition with laws concerning access to land, which is terribly important. If you don't recognize access to land for the indigenous peoples, if they're excluded from the land, they also need access to education, to language, to speak their own language. And I always talk about these claims, because and there are some issues and problems and issues which some people have to claim these rights. There in the region of Salta, as you can see, is in the north, and the Tastil people is in Salta. It's the part in yellow. And within this, as you can see, and then there's the indigenous people that I come from, which is the Ross one, the red one. The red dot is the indigenous community Las Cuevas. There's 15 or 20 families there. And as I said, what people claim above all, I'm not saying it's long before 15 years ago, is access to the land above all. Because if you don't have access to land, you have to struggle for other rights. Because other people need other things. Maybe they need decent wages, access to public resources. But here, these indigenous peoples need access to the land above all. Then, of course, there is lack of access to health in many other populations in Argentina. I wanted to ask, how would you define, in a few words, this concept of Buen Vivir, this concept of good living? Currently, theories, social theories, and the indigenous movements consider it as something which was already given importance when we were part of the national state. But what I wanted to say, which I said in the introduction, isn't just a point of view. What I want to share is our own perspective, the Tastil people, the indigenous peoples, because within the very same community we have very different points of view. Do we or don't we want to link with others? Because we feel that also the earth is part of what we are. And it's a cross-cutting thing. We claim, or we consider in reality, good living as a philosophy of life, which isn't only about access to goods, material things, but also symbolic goods. When we talk about symbolic goods, I'm referring to the bond with the land, the bond with water, the bond with the mountains, because all of this makes us our being, that of being human. So now we see the mountain as a place where you can go to relax. We see that it could be private land, it could be where there's some nice water streams. This is where our struggle is, to claim back the collectivity of natural resources. We don't see any difference between humankind and nature. We are part of the one system, humankind and nature, so we need to consider our philosophy. We want to defend the rights of nature itself, stopping people just using these distractions. All this mobilization is to gain access to land, not to think that the land is to be exploited, but to live there, simply not only to produce massive things to be exported, massive quantities of things to export, but land to live on. It's what we need in order to live. So we also want to restore the land, protecting the land up. It's that's our way of seeing the philosophy of good living, to highlight these principles so as to go forward as humanity. It's as you can see, the exploitation of the earth hurts our reality, our very own reality as human beings. So being able to do something to combat and to defend our own species is very important, to reclaim our life, which has this profound relationship with the earth. But it goes beyond a simple relationship with nature. And we're not thinking of I, but of us, because we don't want to claim individualism. We claim the collectivity. This is our fundamental principle. The community of the earth doesn't limit itself to a family, to a person. It's collective. Everything that exists in a social context is to be shared, not to be confined. If we can share everything, if we can have the right to everything, to the products that the land offers, that the animals the mountain offers, you can all talk about this, but capitalism goes for individualism, private property, the policies that people promote for the earth. They want all these limitations and cutting up, and this breaks with our philosophy. And sometimes to gain access to the land, we have to accept the rules of the game. If we don't accept that this can be adjusted and that you could put an end to private property, others will come. The ones from different places coming with other interests, and they will destroy our own territory. So now we are fighting with all these different types of power struggle. The indigenous peoples really are struggling, making a lot of effort, seeking that the principles of Buen Vivir, a good life, can go beyond state politics. But it is a constant struggle. But sometimes then we have to accept the rules of the game just for the sake of accessing the land, because if we don't own the land, if we don't have this geographical, territorial, legal ownership, then we can't go anywhere either. So this is why things are tricky, but we can make some progress. That's our philosophy. I think you said very well what the concept is today, not only the struggling of the different peoples, but all that's going on in this ecological content. I really like what you said about the political potential that is part of your struggle. Yes, because I claim this, I affirm this, that every person and people has a different point of view. They might have other resources. There might be water, forests, land for some people. So these natural goods need to be preserved. So the nature isn't something outside ourselves. It's a constitutive part, essential part of what we are. And if we see nature like this, then we see these resources. We don't just see them in terms of materialism and economic resources. We can save ourselves as humanity. This is our aim, to save humanity so that the indigenous peoples don't have to be sent away to other places, that they should have an internal opportunities to go ahead as a group. So this is not only material, but there's also the symbolic. And these are like the offers given to Mother Earth, offerings to Mother Earth here. Things that are produced from the earth itself, our foods, and so on. So we want to give back to the earth what the earth itself has given us. So it's returning to the earth as a thanksgiving, a gift. These you will find in different places offerings to Mother Earth here and there. Here too, you can see other aspects of collectivity. The first photo shows the distribution of bread for the community, not only the family. So thinking about things in this way enables us to overcome the logic of competition. If there's something that can be shared, I'll do it. Because it's not a question of accumulating goods and keeping them for ourselves. But if we've got something left over, we can share it. So I was talking about these 10 or 15, 20 families. There's sufficient food for everybody, for each family. So this is the collective dimension, which is a transcendent dimension. Here's in the photo, you can't see it, but this lady is working, the lady in the middle working on textiles. It's a mantle. She's preparing wool to make a shawl for other elderly people. She's preparing something for other grandmothers who may be left behind by children and grandchildren who've gone off to find their fortune elsewhere. Because when we are deprived of the right to use our own land, we have no other source of life, of income in other places. This is what is really shocking, because without resources, what can people do in a place where we're not used to be living? We're used to the resources we have on our own land, but if we're not in places where we have these possibilities, it's very, very difficult. So other lifestyles, people migrating into cities, you have to change. The whole context changes. People are marginalized, they're exploited. So that's why many want to go back to their original land. And so then people understand one another as a network, as a collectivity, staying in our own communities, in our own places, in our own original territory. This is what we want. So here's an elderly lady who's helping other elderly ladies with what they need. And then the other photos, collective. It's again here another offering to Mother Earth. It's very interesting. You are working in the field of education. I want to ask you a different question. Could you tell us something, talking perhaps a little bit more slowly, if you can, for the translations, how we can develop this concept in the field of education? I am a university professor. There are many places where this struggle goes on. This too is my family. So we're all engaged at different levels in this struggle. I've had the opportunity, the good fortune to go to university, and I thought, how can we pursue this struggle, which is so modern. There is this overwhelming wish for control on the part of government and other peoples, this hegemonic point of view. So we have to overcome capitalism and individualism and materialism. It's very difficult because it's almost impossible to have projects in favor of others because people don't have the idea of the bond, with a strong bond with a family and a people and a strong bond with the land. They don't have it, and so they don't understand it. So, but in a context of dialogue and debate, and in secondary schools where I worked on research projects and did my doctorate, I must say that we're still working on there is in the whole life there is this control aspect in terms of food and land. It's all dominated by the logic of capitalism and also the educational institutional methods, whereas our philosophy, our concept of the body of people has to become part of this context. We need to ask how to go ahead, how to connect with all this educational system, because, as I said before, it's not that the project is for us. This good living project is not only for us. We shouldn't do it for ourselves. When it's for everybody and everyone, so then these educational processes in our society can enable this broader understanding. And this is what I try to do in my daily life. Thank you so much for the time you've spent with us to share your experience, your people in its struggle. We'll be glad to know more. There will be future opportunities. And so a big round of applause to you. Thank you very much.
Now we'll move to another experience of good living that's inspiring entire peoples and nations. This is Bolivia and Ecuador, where good living is a constitutional principle, but it's also the case in Chile, where good living is a principle that's being discussed for the drafting of the new constitution. And so we want to know something about this experience, how this idea has entered into the debate of the new constitution. And we'll hear about this from Consuela and Giovanni, who are from Santiago, from Chile. Are you there? Welcome.
Hola. Bueno, mi nombre es Consuelo Huerta, soy psicóloga. Yo soy Giovanni Vecchio, profesor universitario. Vivimos a Santiago, in Chile.
We live in Santiago, in Chile. I'm a psychologist, and he's a university professor. Chile is chasing a huge challenge in recent years, deciding what kind of a country it wants to be, writing a new constitution. It's a process that's been going on for a long time, and we could say a lot about the wounds that generated it and the hopes that accompanied it. The young people here carry ahead this project on the streets, and they're looking for a new constitution. And we could say a lot about this, about the wounds that exist and also the hopes that have accompanied it. But today, we want to share a part of this important process, namely how the original peoples of the country are contributing to the new constitution and how the philosophy of good living is entering into this process. The first point is that the Constitutional Convention of Chile, the assembly in charge of writing the new document, is the first joint assembly in the world. For the first time, the number of men and women writing a new constitution is the same, 77 and 77. And not only that, for the first time, the indigenous peoples of the country have reserved seats. And from the beginning, the convention has provided a special space for them to make their voice heard in the assembly. Their representatives are 17 and include many different peoples. There's a large group of Mapuche who live in the south and were never conquered by the colonial empires, to the Changos, a small people in the north legally recognized only in 2020. For the first time, these peoples have had a special opportunity, not only to make their vision of the world and the country heard, but also to make themselves visible. So on the first day of work at the convention, there was room for traditional customs and languages other than Spanish. In addition, in the first year of work, the president of the convention was Elisa Loncon, a Mapuche academic. She's a linguist and activist for indigenous peoples. Good living, or Kumemogan, as we say, was part of his election program. And her job as president, this is how Elisa defines it. The Kumemogan is a principle of interdependence. The well-being of the individual depends on the well-being of the community, and vice versa. Good living is also a very important principle for its integrity. It includes as a whole the ecological aspect, such as the care of the earth, the economic aspect, the economies of reciprocity and complementarity between the community and nature. The social, cultural, and spiritual aspect that implies respect between human beings without distinction of sex, class, cultural belonging. All this to give space to balance and harmony between people, the family and the community, between peoples, also in harmony with nature. And today, an article in the final text explicitly speaks of the principle of good living, stating that the state recognizes and promotes a harmoniously balanced relationship between people, nature, and the organization of society. But the principle of good living is not easy to apply. Firstly, some of the elements that make up this principle, for example, listening and speaking well, these things have not always been respected in the convention itself. The debate between the different groups has often been intense and not very open to dialogue between different ideas. Secondly, some have seen the principles of good living as an instrument to differentiate the rules for the original peoples and the laws for the other inhabitants of the country. Moreover, many proposed environmental standards seem very strong and demanding and difficult to reconcile with the functioning of society when many members of indigenous peoples live in cities and are an integral part of them. Some have seen in the promotion of good living the risk of defining a separation between those who belong to indigenous peoples and those who do not. Thirdly, good living has not always been an easy principle to adopt for all members of the convention, given that the representatives of the indigenous peoples themselves have often taken conflicting positions. For these reasons, it's important to look for ways in which good living can also be in dialogue with other principles. Some of us, for example, have drawn up a proposal to incorporate fraternity as a constitutional principle. Is this not also a principle that goes hand in hand with good living and with a harmonious relationship between people? Despite these difficulties, good living presents principles that are very important for thinking about the life of a country and a society. For example, good living speaks of knowing how to give, how to receive. This exchange of ideas, experiences, and visions is fundamental for a country, especially when its inhabitants live in such different realities. The challenge facing Chile at the moment of writing a new constitution is not to remain each with their own vision, but to put it together with those of others. Moreover, in a historical moment like this, it seems difficult to think about the future. Pandemics, wars, climate change, social inequality, and polarization are changing the world we were used to knowing and make it difficult to think about what kind of people, society, or country we want to be. However, good living tells us about another important element, knowing how to dream. We're proud to see that despite the uncertainties and difficulties, Chile is trying to dream and to put on paper the country it wants to be in the future. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias Consuelo.
Thank you, Consuelo and Giovanni.
Porque nos han ayudado a pensar un poco.
We've reached the end of this session, and we want to think of what limits are there of this good living, and how can we think of these. Now we'll have a pause of 20 minutes, also for those who are translating, but you've got a job to do. So can we project? If you go www.menti.com and type in this code 59775051. What do I think is the main force of good living to make our societies more united and supportive? The code is 59775051. And so a break of 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together. So we'll come back.
A las 3:05, perdón.
When
3:05 minuti. Nos vemos acá de nuevo.
we're coming back in 15 minutes at 15:05.
Si se puede poner de nuevo
In 15 minutes.
la pregunta.
So if you can project the slide again, so we can see the question and the code, at least to be able to read it again.
Welcome back from the break. Thank you for your answers on the Mentimeter. We've got many different replies and the words that we received. If the control room could put these up on the screen. So we've got fraternity, together, community, earth. Because as we see today, good living means being in relationship. Yesterday, we saw that this relationship is about nature, and today we see that it's also about our own societies, both locally and globally. This is why we're thinking of many people who move, who migrate from one continent to another, but this is also a story of my own family and work. I come from Rwanda, where in 1994, the year of my birth, a bloody genocide broke out that forced us to flee. We came to Italy as political refugees, and I work now in this field. I think that we young people can play a fundamental role to enable young people to take a leading role, the new generations to come forward in increasing co-responsibility in civil society and in politics. So now we're going to talk about it. Today we're going to talk about with Melchior Nansavignana, a young man from Burundi who studied political science in Italy at the Sofia University Institute. And now he's back in Africa, and he's working in South Sudan for the World Food Programme. Great to see you, Melchior. So, I know that you are carrying out something really amazing, which is called Together for New Africa. Can you tell us what it's all about? How did it happen? And what are its objectives? Thank you, Maria Chiara. I'm from Burundi, and I work in South Sudan for the United Nations World Food Programme. The Together for a New Africa project is an initiative taken up by young people, students, and people who have been through university, who, having studied at Sofia, having such a great and intense experience at Sofia, they posed experiences. It's all very well having had this experience. I too am among these young people, but how can we help? How can we help our young African people to participate, to have a greater passion, a greater positive leadership, and a leadership for unity, so that as to address the many, many challenges that you can well imagine exist in our contexts. So we are the initiators, and we went to meet some of these young people. We said it wasn't enough to just have an idea, but we must go to see these young people, talk to them, hear what their ideas are and what their vision, and how they can tell it. They can tell it to us for themselves. And we talked to them in 2019. Now there are different actors in this initiative with the principal objective, the aim of positive leadership for unity. And it's first of all the students themselves who got engaged with this process. Other actors in the process are the tutors, because a process of this kind, in order to educate young people to positive leadership for unity, they need to be accompanied, of course. So we've chosen the tutors and teachers to accompany them, to accompany these students from many different countries, the professors, teachers who give talks. They're not only teachers, but experts who have the experience in the field of leadership, but understood as a complex leadership, not just as individual leadership, a collective leadership, and other actors actors, for example, have helped us on our path. The Politics for Unity movement, the Sofia University itself, the UNESCO people, and the Focolare movement. But the heart and the focus is that all of these actors do this work voluntarily. We don't pay them because they know that they're doing it for their own community and for them. So could you tell us then what's been done up to now, what point you've reached? It's difficult to say in just a few minutes. We've already formed 100 young people at a regional level. So all these young people who've taken part on a course that lasts 4 years, that's 100 young people accompanied by their tutors. They've come from different countries. Each country sent 2 teachers. We were able to create a network of young people at a regional level, grouping them according to countries, networks among the teachers and professors, WhatsApp group, a Facebook group, all in different ways, but a network which continues today to connect everyone right up to today. So not only have we formed these people because at a local level they went out in turn to form other young people. So there's over 5,000 young people who've had this formation at national level, because from the regional level, these students and graduates went to form the people of their age. Now we've got a wider network. We've engaged with other universities, other associations, because we said it's not that just we who can do this, but we initiate things. Thank you so much. I imagine that in these years that you would have, how many experiences would you'd have to tell us? So I'd ask you for one experience, if you could tell us. It's difficult to choose an experience. I've been in Burundi, was in Burundi recently, where the young people themselves held a conference at the university, and I was really struck seeing how these young people managed to bring together over 350 young people from different universities, bringing together their teachers and professors from 4 universities, all coming together to speak about this idea of leadership, and how together then they were very practical. They went out to help a community in need because there'd been a flood. So to see this really practical outcome work done by them, or then with COVID, we didn't really know what to do. We didn't know whether we could do regional formation again, but they said, we'll do it at national level. So in regional among several countries, but they've decided to do it at national level. Each country then organized itself. And who is it who's been in the lead? The young people themselves. They did the program, the communication. Each put their talents into play in order to organize these conferences, which were fantastically successful. So I can imagine how pleased you were that you did something so well. So my very last question for you is about the future. What are the next steps? There was a very sunny future. We are so happy to see where we're going. As I had already said, we began with 7 countries, but this initiative brought together very many young people, and they became passionate about this from all over the continent. So we got many, many requests from these young people who want to take part in the second round of courses. Unfortunately, we are a small organization at the level of coordination. There's 6 of us coordinating all of this, and also the finances. We don't have a lot of money to organize to organize something at a continental level. But we have taken one step from 7 countries. We've jumped to 14 countries. We've engaged with other countries. So now it's 14. We've already done some things. We've chosen the tutors as well. Every country was to offer 3 tutors. These tutors, if you see them, I had the good fortune to take part in the interviews because we had to make it an official selection of these people who accepted to be tutors. They're university professors. Others are young people who were at the last cycle who offered to help other young people. Some of these really students, graduate students who become tutors of this course. We've got we've got 3 from each, so we've got 48 tutors now. And in September they will have a formation. They'll have some training because they need to know what we expect of them during the 3 years in which the course runs. So this is a new phase which will engage us much more, which we can give a hand in different ways. Perhaps someone can suggest a professor or an expert. Everyone can contribute to the project. Everybody can contribute. But given that we've got such a short time, I think if you go and have a look on our website, it's very simple. You can see everything on Together for a New Africa there. And so everyone feels so many young people are really passionate about it. Another thing about outcomes you asked that I forgot to say is to see that many young people adhere to the politics for unity movement when they finished their formation. Others got involved with the economy of communion. Others are taking part of the Focolare movement meetings. So these young people who are formed in this way are not lost. They're always linked with us, and they're continuing to be with us, developing their talents in the different forums that are available to them. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
That was just what we were saying at the beginning, this co-responsibility and the presence of the new generations can really give great inspiration to us all. A huge thank you, Melchior. Stay with us, speakers. Now we want to talk about another youth experience. We're still with young people. We're on the border between the United States and Mexico, and 2 young people who could said to be inspired by the principles of good living wondered what they could do for a more united and supportive society. And this gave rise to the idea of a podcast that unites the US-Mexico border. They are Chris and Noel. They're 2 youth for a united world. I've asked William to come back up on the stage again because I don't want the language to be a barrier. I think maybe you could interview these young people because I really want the essence of their experience to come so they can express themselves in their own language. I want to begin by showing you a video they made about the frontier between Mexico and the US.
Migration isn't an unusual thing. People come and go through the Italian. But it's also always been a very divisive issue with people who are for it and others who are against it. Recently, things have become even more divisive with talks of building a wall and securing the border, painting the image of migration as a threat that needs to be handled. And even more recently with all the news about this caravan of migrants traveling from the different parts of Central America. Some of the rhetoric that's been used has been dehumanizing, labeling this caravan as an invasion with fears that it's a herd made up of criminals coming to wreak havoc on the US. which bothers me because this point of view on things feels apathetic. It ignores the fact that poverty and violence are real global issues. I think the reality is that these people are in dire need because of those issues. The problem, in all its complexity, can only be solved collectively because we have to work together on every side.
Es inimaginable lo que estas personas están viviendo. Nos dimos la tarea de visitar a los inmigrantes, escucharlos y conocer la verdad detrás de todo esto. Esta gente está siendo amenazada, juzgada y atacada violentamente después de sufrir un largo camino de hambre y de sufrimiento.
Son nosotros
De una realidad que tú y yo no conocemos. Están escapando de una realidad donde solo aquellos con dinero tienen acceso a la educación.
These people are escaping from dictatorship. They've got no access to education. That all that's in front of them is delinquency, and this is degrading them because they're human creatures like we are, like you and me. And we all deserve respect because this is the way to achieve our goal, a united world. We're not criminals. We are victims looking for refuge, a united world.
Adesso parliamo con Noè, uno dei due ragazzi del podcast via Zoom della frontiera degli Stati
Now we'll speak to Noah, who's one of the young people who's part of this project. Noah, we know it's very early in the morning for you, Noah, to be here with us. Can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. Where did this idea come from? Where did this podcast originate? It was born as an initiative from various young people of the Focolare movement with the intention so that this message, this desire to build a united world so that it could reach people outside who don't know our ideas. So people who are working to build a more united world for everybody. So with this initiative, we began to interview people, to be able to share with them what was happening. And to be able to build this united world. And it was a very interesting journey. There were problems looking for work. There were lots of people with different talents, and we worked together on it. But then we had to stop for a while, but we've picked it up again now, and we've seen that on the frontier between Mexico and the US, maybe it's the frontier with the greatest amount of immigration going backwards and forwards. How are you doing it? Nothing new. It's still a very difficult situation with many people who are coming, especially from Latin America. This is the main transit route. But people coming from all over the world to use this pathway. It's not just people from Mexico, but from many countries of Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, Venezuela, Cuba, many other countries. And they're using it as a transit. They're going through, they're escaping from the desert, walking for hours, for days. Places where there's nothing, there's no water, there's nothing to eat. They put their lives at risk. to manage to reach this American dream, as they call it. I know that beyond the podcast, you do other things as well. You're working for the community of the Latin American immigrants. Can you tell us something about the work you're doing there to help these immigrants in the spirit of Youth for a United World? Now, I've got a job with an organization to support the community of immigrants that crosses the desert towards the United States. And they're looking for their relatives. They've lost contact with them. So they're looking for some kind of a contact through the consulate. We find someone who has these problems, and maybe they've no idea where their relatives have gone, what's happened. They just know that their relatives have crossed this frontier maybe a few days before them or a longer time before them. And so they want to contact them through the different organizations in the different countries of the immigration in the US to see if it's possible to find these relatives of theirs, or if these people have maybe been arrested or sent back again, we don't know. So we try to help them to find this information so as to be able to contact their relatives. And this is what we're trying to do. This is my job now. Thank you for this, for what you're doing for the community and all the other projects. And we want to be sure that you've got all our support, and we're living together for a united world wherever we are. Thank you so much, Noah. We'll see you again soon. Have a good day. We just had an idea. We thought of an activity because we'd really like to help these young people with their podcast. So now we'll divide into groups in the hall, or you can, the people closest to you, maybe with the same language, whereas on Zoom, we could open some breakup rooms. Instead, those on streaming, we invite you to go onto Zoom so then we can be together. We've got 20 minutes to think of a subject that, according to you, we should talk about in one of these podcasts. Maybe a slogan or an idea. Think for the theme. Think what you're living in your country. But above all, inspirations that are really for this good living and the way we want the world to become. We want to remind you that the problem of migration is huge. It begins when people already in their country before they leave, and then all the different stages. So you've got to think of migration as a very long process that goes through different generations in different places. And so we want you to think of a slogan that can describe that podcast. And you've got to send this to the WhatsApp number that we'll put up here. Yes? Here's our number, 3934955774552. I'm mixing my languages. And don't forget to send also a photo of your group, okay? So, on Zoom, we need to wait. It takes about 10 seconds for the breakout rooms. They're opening the rooms there. Inside here, we can get together for 20 minutes. Okay, right. Bye.
3, 4, 5, 2, 5, 7. 3, 5, 5, 5, 7, 4, 3, 2, 4.
2. I don't know.
El mio break era
Allora, bentornati, bentornati.
Ciao a tutti, tutte in sala.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, you were amazing. Loads of slogans and ideas for the podcast came. Maybe we could hear just a few of them. So, thanks to everybody. So, for integral economics, we want to have accessible. This can't actually understand what's really being said here, or who's saying it either. But it's about the impact that the new type of economics can have in our life, in the environment, and in the world. So thank you very much, and loads of fantastic photographs as well. So with this dream of a world without frontiers, we got another feedback.
El tema sería hablar un poco sobre la migración en términos de.
We want to talk about migration.
De un país a otro, sino también de quien
so the people who cross frontiers, the people who cross the frontiers of their own countries, not only, and that people should be ready to welcome others and share it and share. Thank you so much. Here's one more.
Sì. Abbiamo una foto del cono sud.
Photograph from the southern cone.
Da parte sur de Sudamerica.
It's the southernmost part of South America.
Show us.
Guardiamo insieme quest'ultima foto.
We'll just see the last photo now.
Grazie.
Thank you so much. That is amazing.
Allora, ecco, come dicevo, ormai siamo alle conclusioni.
So, as I said, we're coming to the conclusions of this event. We can send you all these contributions to the guys from the podcast, and some will also put on our site. What I was saying was that we want to keep going with our dream of a world without frontiers, in which there should be this good living that grows among people. And so with this wish, we say goodbye to everyone. We thank all of you who are here, all of you who are following on Zoom. We'll see you very soon, and a huge applause to everyone.